Here we are approaching the end of October here, which means Halloween is around the corner, and what I'm going to recap here this past month. Fortunately, there's more tricks than treats, and the way this playoff race is shaping up has been just as uncomfortable as a horror movie. So anyway, stick around, it's time for another Hi there, it's Brett Hornby here. Welcome back to another episode of my Calgary Stampeders this month. This is where I recap the Calgary Stampeders this past month during the CFL season. Up to episode 5 here already. We're down the stretch here. This month I'll be talking about October 2018 during the 2018 CFL season, and as you got the gist of in the opening here, that it's definitely been a lot more interesting as it needed to be. Plus, things haven't been as easy as it has been the previous months. I mean, there's been a lot more tricks along the way, but might have found a few treats, and there's still one more thing that Calgary can do to still get the one treat here. Anyway, if you like everything I post on my channel here, just make sure you hit like, subscribe. I mean, I do sports recaps on all Calgary sports teams, and I also toss in the odd scenery video, and I'm also going to have some personal vlogs here around the corner. So stay tuned for that, and make sure I try to post at least something or a couple videos weekly, and just stay tuned on the weekly end. There's bound to be something new on my channel every week. So before I get into the gist of reviewing October, if you went back to episode 3 where I recapped Calgary Stampeders in August, I mentioned that, unless you haven't heard in the news already, but I mentioned that defensive coordinator Devon Claybrooks was hospitalized towards the end of the month, and unfortunately he actually had a diabetic scare. He wound up only missing the home game against Winnipeg just before Labor Day, but he was back at it, hat slanted, coaching our defense, leading our defense on Labor Day, and has been back since then. I mean, I meant to cover that, in September video, but the Mike Labinjo sudden death definitely overtook that. So make sure you watch episode 4. I put in the time stamp. I believe it's the 29-minute 30-second mark, where after recapped Calgary Stampeders in September, I recapped or did a little tribute to Mike Labinjo, and actually, interestingly, I knew some people on my Facebook friends list, that I actually knew him as a person, and I told them sorry for their loss, but I needed to get that tribute in for Mike Labinjo. So anyway, I'm sort of delaying the inevitable here, but I got my notes here, which, as I did with my Calgary Hitman in 6 video, the recent one, I should have thought of this earlier, but instead of scribbling notes on my pad here, I figured it's time to use Google Docs and put all my notes on there, and I could do it on the go and edit on the go and then have everything right here. So let's start talking about October here, and I do have some legitimate concerns here, but it's been a crazy playoff race, so in some way this is sort of fitting here. So let's start off. Coming in October, Calgary was 11-2, first in the West. Things were looking good. That we had a playoff date secured, and it was almost time to start planning on opening up your calendar for November 18th for the Western Final. But then October hit. So let's rewind back to week 17, where we went to Percival Molson Stadium on Monday, October the 8th, which was 11 p.m. kickoff. That's Canadian Thanksgiving, and surprisingly, Calgary has struggled in Montreal the last 4 years. I mean, they haven't won there since 2013, and Montreal has been, a tough spot for Calgary the last couple of years. My couple theories on that is the fact that how the schedule's worked out. Montreal has been struggling the last few years since Anthony Calvillo retired, and they've been in the bottom league, and Calgary's been one of the top teams in the league since this past decade. But I think one of the reasons why we seem to trip up in Montreal is the fact that the game is scheduled late in the season, where the playoff fates are pretty much sealed for both teams, and the fact that more often than not, this game is scheduled at, let's say, 11 o'clock in the morning. This is Mountain Time, so it's 1 p.m. Eastern Time, but your body still thinks it's 11 o'clock Mountain Time, which happens to be a case, Canadian Thanksgiving, or they've had these games on Sunday afternoons, and that seems to trip Calgary up. Plus, how the schedule looks, it's generally natural to look ahead to the competition ahead. Plus, Montreal historically struggles in Vancouver, especially when they play the Friday night, because 7 p.m. in Vancouver is 10 p.m. kickoff to Montreal, and so they're feeling like they're playing until 1 in the morning. I know we're all human beings here, and you could say that, you get used to the time zone after a couple of days, but to be honest with you, when I went to Ottawa last year for the Grey Cup, and it was the first time that I personally was 2 time zones away from home, and the sun always felt like it was setting a lot earlier, and kept pulling on my smartphone and realized, it's 4:30 Eastern, but my body thinks it's 2:30 p.m. So I think this is one of the reasons why Calgary struggles in Montreal, and they definitely struggled in this game. I mean, it was probably the ugliest win you could possibly get, because this was also the first time that the Calgary Stampeders got to see Johnny Manziel play live, and actually in this game, Johnny Manziel actually helped pass Bo Levi Mitchell. Johnny Football actually has, up to this recording, had his best individual performance passing yards. He had 250 passing yards, while Bo only had 199 yards passing and 3 interceptions. So you think that's a loss right there. But the one thing that definitely helped in Calgary's favor, and one of the reasons why I say Johnny Manziel has struggled in the CFL since he's been traded to Montreal, is their offensive line, because one highlight you can say is that our defense had 6 sacks in that game, including Jagger Davis and Micah Johnson, the team leader, had 2 sacks each that game. And then time of possession. I mean, we had the ball a lot for much of the game, which Montreal has had a strong defense over the years, but they eventually looked like they ran out of gas. And, kudos to them for only allowing 12 points against the Calgary Stampeders. This was the lowest point total that the Calgary Stampeders have put up this season up to this point. But when you only score 6 points themselves, you're not going to win too many football games. So that definitely played a role in this ugly win, the ugliest win that I can recall in years. And there could have been a few more points on the board, but Terry Williams, who had a punt return wiped out due to a penalty, which I'm still kind of figuring out where that penalty was, but it was a close defensive struggle. But Calgary had the time of possession, and Bo didn't have his best game. And Johnny Manziel, I say he had a great game, but when he's running for his life and on his butt being sacked, I mean, he can only do so much. And another thing that's become a recurring theme with the Calgary Stampeders this year is a wide receiver got hurt. This time, Markeith Hamels, he got hurt in this game, and he's out for the season. Luckily, they got Eric Rogers back, and he played his first game since July. So there's a trade-off here, but as we get through the video here, there's a couple receivers that they picked up that could help us in the playoff run if we can pull up our socks here. But as I already said, that this is a game that Calgary did manage to win 12-6. It definitely wasn't pretty. We're thankful that Montreal has a weak offense, and I think we got in Johnny Manziel's kitchen enough. But Calgary won 12-6, where all 12 of those points came in the fourth quarter. So not only Montreal stopped Calgary to 12 points, they were able to keep Calgary off the board until the fourth quarter. So that's some kudos to Montreal. But I think it's a combination of maybe my theory on why Calgary has struggled in Montreal in recent seasons, and having a early game across the country late in the season where both teams kind of know their playoff fates. But what this game did was give Calgary its 12th win of the season, and it locked them at least a home playoff date, which it would be either the Western semifinal on November 11th or the Western final on November 18th. So that was week 17 against the Montreal Alouettes. So let's fast forward to week 18, which happened on Saturday, October 13th, against BC Lions back home at McMahon Stadium. And BC Lions, especially since after Labor Day, has been one of the top teams in the league. And if you also go back to August there, I felt when the BC Lions were here back in week 8, when Calgary won 27-19, that was the first real test that the BC Lions had, because Lule was back, and their offense was slowly getting together, and they still had good pieces on defense. But before I really get deep in the game here, I forget to mention here that with Mark and Michelle on the 6-game injury list, listen to these names that's on the 6-game injury list just for receive. You got Mark and Michelle, Kamar Jordan, Devers Daniels, and Reggie Bagleton. Those 4 guys all on the 6-game injury list. So this has definitely been a factor why there's been more tricks than treats for Calgary since this month in October. But in between the Montreal and BC game, they actually signed Chris Matthews, and we mentioned his name a few times during the course of this video. But same Chris Matthews, who was a Rookie of the Year with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in 2012. He's wearing number 81 for Calgary. And he also played in the Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks in the NFL in that game where the Seahawks, with that passing play. You remember that play in the Super Bowl where the Patriots won? But yeah, Matthews played in that game. But he's definitely been a nice pickup here. And I was getting back to the Calgary BC game here. This was definitely a tough one for the Calgary Stampeders, both that the offense still looked pretty sluggish like they did against Montreal. I guess it was a fairly short week because they played in Montreal Monday afternoon across the country, and then they came back to play BC back at home on Saturday. But this was also the first game for Terrell Sutton for the BC Lions, and that was definitely the big factor for the BC Lions, is that they outran the Calgary Stampeders that game. And Travis Lule looks like he's back for his form back in 2011 when he won the MLP and led the BC Lions to the Grey Cup at home. So this definitely proved to be a tough one here. BC at one point was up 20-4 in the second quarter, and looked like they're going to run away with this one. But there was some hope for the Calgary Stampeders in the second quarter, where they were able to get a fumble recovery from a punt return, and had an interception deep in BC territory, so they had 2 short fields there, and next thing you know, it was 20-18 at halftime, and which definitely got us back in the game. But the second half just proved to be a defensive struggle. Both teams traded field goals, but unfortunately the Calgary Stampeders lost this one. It was 26-21 against the BC Lions. This actually tied up the season series because Calgary has one more game against the BC Lions here. Another couple footnotes here is that Markeith Hamels, who's been, he's definitely been proving to be a nice depth. He's been on the practice roster all season. Caught a touchdown pass, and recently signed Chris Matthews. Both Hamels and Matthews had a touchdown for the Calgary Stampeders in this game. So, it still was a tough loss. And one last footnote here, coaching legend Wally Bono. This was his last appearance at McMahon Stadium as head coach. So before the game, they had a nice little video tribute to him and all the accomplishments that he's done and what he's done in the CFL, what he's meant for Calgary and the BC Lions. So thanks to Wally Bono, and I'm pretty sure, even though it's just, I had a couple Calgary sports legends retired in a short time here, and with Jerome McGinley and Nick Lewis, that I had a couple of tributes to him, but I'm sure I'll do be a tribute to Wally Bond in the off season and put that in my Calgary Sports Legends playlist. So that's the wrap for the BC game. So the next game, which was week 19, this one's definitely was highly anticipated. It's the last home game of the regular season before the playoffs. Was against the Saskatchewan Roughriders. This game happened on Saturday, October the 20th, the following Saturday at McMahon Stadium with a 5 p.m. kickoff, and definitely was a lot on the line here because, as I mentioned, after the win in Montreal, Calgary clinched the home playoff date. But these next 3 games, they had one more win. They were to clinch first place in the West and have a date for the Western Final, but this definitely could prove another crusty loss here for the Calgary Stampeders because not only we were playing the Saskatchewan Roughriders, who, like the BC Lions, have been really turning it on in the second half of the season here, but this game decided the rubber match because back in week 7, the Calgary Stampeders beat the Saskatchewan Roughriders 34-22. But then the Saskatchewan Roughriders got the revenge on Calgary with the 40-27 victory, both in Regina here. So the season series was split at 1 apiece. So whoever won this game would get the season series and a potential tiebreak. And unfortunately, Calgary looked once again sluggish. Their offense couldn't really do anything. And Zach Collaros definitely had outpassed Bo Levi Mitchell in this game, just like he did in Week 10, and you got guys like Cameron Marshall ran Don Jackson and Jordan Williams Lambert, his name for the receiver for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, definitely stood out with the 100-yard game. But this is definitely wasn't a good game for the Calgary Stampeders. But speaking of the Roughriders, another receiver that the Calgary Stampeders actually picked up in between the BC and Saskatchewan game. He actually played with the Saskatchewan Roughriders last year and had his first 1,000-yard receiving season. Was Bakari Grant, who also played with the Calgary Stampeders in 2016. He has not played yet for the Calgary Stampeders this season, but it's another depth receiver that the Calgary Stampeders picked up. It's much badly needed. So they got Bakari Grant back, who's on the practice roster wearing number 20. It was one of the guys that the Saskatchewan Roughriders cut to start the season because they definitely had some younger receivers to pick up the slack here. So Bakari Grant is also back in the fold here. I meant to say that before I got into this game, but anyway, the other reason that they were able to get Bakari Grant back was Markeith Hamels was already signed with the Hamilton Tiger Cats, another team that's had receiver injuries. So anyway, let's get back to the Saskatchewan Roughriders game. This was definitely a tough loss it was a close game, but like I said, Zach Collaros outpassed Bo Levi Mitchell. Zach had 352 yards passing, while Bo only had 221 yards. And Cameron Marshall had 76 yards rushing, while Don Jackson had 52 yards, both on 11 carries here. But the score got closer than it was in the first half because Romar Morris, who Terry Williams actually was not available and injured that game, he actually returned a punt return for a touchdown. So that kind of, masked the sluggish offense and kept the game closer than it needed to be. But I just felt that Calgary, they did move the ball well at one point in the second half, but then there was a questionable play call where Bo Levi Mitchell threw deep in the end zone for Eric Rodgers, and it got intercepted, and I think that killed any chance of momentum that the Calgary Stampeders had to get back and take the lead. Both the BC and Saskatchewan home games, the Calgary Stampeders never led in both those games, and this definitely makes the playoff race in the West a lot more interesting than I feel it needed to be. But And then plus the huge contingent of Rider fans that are at the stadium. They were definitely a lot happier fans than the Red guys like me. And we lost another game, this time by 5 points again. It was a 29-24 win for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So they do have the tie break, and so as you'll find out later in the video here, we must win the last game or we won't get the Western Final. So let's wrap up October here. The segment of the schedule here. Week 20 happened on Friday, October 26th. It was taking on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at Investors Group Field here, and there was definitely a couple of caveats with this game, is that both Calgary Stampeders, they won. First place is wrapped up. But if Winnipeg won, they clinch a playoff spot at that time and eliminate the Edmonton Eskimos from the playoffs. And what happened was that Calgary definitely got off to a good start here. Chris Matthews definitely continued his, he's been a nice pickup for the Calgary Stampeders to, get some receiving help, and he led away with a touchdown pass, and during this game he had 113 yards passing, and unlike the BC and Saskatchewan game, the Calgary Stampeders actually led in this game, had a 12-6 lead at the halftime, and thinking maybe we'll pull this one out. But unfortunately, the Winnipeg had a big third quarter. They put up 20 points here, and I would say that we did at least fight back and take a small lead. Markeith Hamels, another guy who's emerged as maybe a go-to receiver down the stretch here, but Winnipeg kept fighting back. Darvin Adams, Chris Streveler had a quick 2-yard run pass. Calgary was down actually 26-18 in the fourth quarter, and then Justin Medlock widened the lead here. But then there was definitely some controversy in this game that Calgary was driving down the field, and it looked like Calgary scored a touchdown by Eric Rogers, but the command center ruled it incomplete. So that definitely killed any hope for the Calgary Stampeders. But there was definitely the things that Dave Dickinson was not happy about with the Calgary Stampeders in terms of execution and too many penalties here. But the Calgary Stampeders took another close one off the chin here, where they lost this one 29-21 against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But they did eliminate the Edmonton Eskimos in the process. That's the only small silver lining here. But once again, first in the West is still up for the grabs. Although one footnote here is that congratulations to Weston Dressler, the receiver for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, received 10,000 yards passing his career. So he's been a great receiver for both the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So to sum up October here, we've lost 3 in a row here, and the West Division has tightened up after this recording here. The Saskatchewan Roughriders have won their game. They actually finished their season because they have a bye in week 21, so they're 12-6 right now. Calgary's 12-5. So if Calgary loses their last game, they'll be 12-6 with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. But Saskatchewan has the tiebreak, and they would get first place in the West if we don't win the last game. So I still say there's still concern here. I mean, the offense has looked a little shaky. I don't know if it's the strength of schedule, receiver. I mean, it's definitely been some factors here, but this almost feels like going down the stretch last season. But last season, we locked up the West early, so it's just a balance of, do you rest your players or keep them sharp? It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, but Calgary definitely needs to pull up their socks here if they want to have a home playoff date, Western Final at home, and be celebrating at the brick field at Como Stadium next month. So now let's get into next month here, which is one more game left, and this has definitely still got some playoff implications. It's week 21, happens on Saturday, November 3rd at BC Place, 8 p.m. kickoff. It's the last game of the regular season for both the Calgary Stampeders, and this will actually be the last game on the calendar. So what's interesting with this game is that given how the playoff picture actually cleared up, that's why I waited the extra day to do this video. But the Calgary Stampeders can still clinch first in the West. They beat the BC Lions. But it'd be interesting to see how the BC Lions are going to approach this game, because after how everything played out in Week 20, the BC Lions clinched the playoff spot last week, but they lost to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and with Winnipeg winning, the BC Lions fall to 4th place, and the way how the East played out, the BC Lions know they're going to the Hammer to play the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the Eastern semifinals, a crossover team. So the BC Lions know their playoff fate after this game. I know it's at home, and there'll be maybe some motivation for, Wally Bonner to win his last regular season game as a head coach in the CFL. But the Calgary Stampeders better be motivated for this game, so that and that I feel like this group right now can use a bye and figure out what's been causing more tricks and treats, and get out of this funk here and still keep the Grey Cup dream alive. But that's the only regular season game that we know for November, and I'll do an episode 6 recapping that game next week, teeing up the playoffs, and I'll spend more time going over the player stats. So anyway, and then I'll do an episode 7 after the playoffs, do a bonus episode. So as we know, Week 21 is the game we know, which would be the Calgary Stampeders going to BC Place on Saturday, November 3rd, to take on the Lions, 8 p.m. kickoff. Now, to go over the playoff schedule here, since we actually have some clarity here, on Sunday, November 11th, you have the East and West semifinals happening. The Eastern semifinal will be at 11 p.m., or 11 a.m. I should say, Mountain. Not going to be that late of a game. And as we know is that the Hamilton Tiger Cats will be hosting the BC Lions. And then the West semifinal will be at 2:30 kickoff. And as we know, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers will either be going to Saskatchewan or Calgary. So the Winnipeg Blue Bombers will be either waiting for this game too. And then the finals, the East and West final, will happen on Saturday, November 18th. 11 a.m. kickoff for the East final, which the Ottawa Red Blacks clinched the first in the West, or in the East, I should say. So they'll be hosting the Eastern final, waiting for the winner of the East semifinal, and we need to wait until after the Calgary BC game on where the Western final is going to be, which would be a 2 p.m. kickoff at wherever, it's either going to be in Calgary or Saskatchewan. And then the last game, which is Saturday, November 25th, which is the 106th Grey Cup, which we know is going to be at the Brickfield at Commonwealth Stadium, 4 p.m. kickoff. And we know that the Edmonton Eskimos, Montreal Alouettes, and the Toronto Argonauts will not be there because they missed the playoffs. So to give you a preview here, that's the November schedule here. So what I plan to do here is I'll do episode 6 next week, recapping the BC Calgary game. I'll spend a little more time going over player stats, and I'll preview, because I'm going to do it on the road to the Grey Cup. I'll do a playoff preview for all the games, the 5 games, the semifinals, the finals, and the Grey Cup, and then I'll go over the standings before I do all that. So there's definitely still a lot more football to be decided here, and I kept saying all season that ultimately with my Calgary Stampeders, it's what matters what we do in November, and we're almost there in November. I'm not liking how things are looking right now getting to November, but we still control our own destiny, which is always a better thing than relying on other teams to help you out. So anyway, if you enjoy everything that I do on my YouTube channel, just make sure you hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video, and we'll finally get some clarity on the entire playoff picture, and we'll get ready to see you watch another run to the Grey Cup.